Welcome back, everyone. You're listening to the Grow Podcast by Farmers Cooperative. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Fast, and today we have Rocky Weber, who is the President and General Counsel of the Nebraska Cooperative Council.
That's correct.
So, I wasn't intending on leading with this, but what does General Counsel mean?
Well, I'm also a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
I spent most of my life, in fact, representing the farmer-owned cooperatives as legal counsel to those companies. And almost 5 years ago, I stepped into the role of president of the Nebraska Cooperative Council, which is a trade association, a statewide trade association representing the interests of the farmer-owned cooperatives.
Okay.
And so now I work more on a legislative, educational, regulatory, government relations standpoint than just doing the day-to-day legal work. And so I'm general counsel to the council, the cooperative council, and then I provide the other services to the members who are the farmer-owned cooperatives.
Okay. So this month is National Cooperative Month. Do you give us a little bit of backstory into Cooperative Month?
All right. Well, it's not only National Cooperative Month, and the United States Department of Agriculture has for many years recognized October as Cooperative Month across the United States. Of course, there's thousands of cooperatives across the United States, agricultural, non-agricultural. We have grocery co-ops, we have financial co-ops, we have housing co-ops. But of course, the biggest sector is the agricultural cooperatives. And in fact, it's not only Co-op Month nationwide, it's Co-op Month in Nebraska. Governor Ricketts on September 10th proclaimed October as Cooperative Month in Nebraska for 2020 and has done so the last several years as well.
Okay. So, and one thing is like public power, that's a cooperative too, isn't it?
There are many. Well, there's all the public power districts, they're organized in different ways. I think we have 3 cooperatively organized rural public power districts in Nebraska. Okay. The rest of them are organized under the Public Power District Act. But we do have 3 members of the Cooperative Council that are also utility cooperatives. We have one telephone cooperative that's a member. And the important thing about that, Nolan, is that's ratepayers getting together, again, over a century ago in many cases, and saying we need this infrastructure in rural Nebraska. We need to do this for ourselves. Nobody else has got the money to come out and do it for us. We're going to join together, and we're going to create this infrastructure, and we're going to maintain it and own it and have it for our benefit. And that's just the underlying co-op model that undergirds all of these cooperative business organizations.
Okay. So roughly last year, you spoke at Farmers Co-op's annual meeting, and I thought you had a lot of good stuff to say. But you did talk a little bit about there's a bit of a breakdown of where cooperatives started and to where they're now, and I think maybe some younger people's understanding of that.
Right.
So why don't you talk a little bit on the on where it started versus where it is now, like how that's evolved over time.
Sure. Well, cooperatives, and I'm going to focus now on the agricultural cooperatives, all right? So our agricultural cooperatives are really formed in Nebraska in the late 1800s, very late 1800s and early 1900s. Really, by 100 years ago now, almost every one of the existing cooperatives in Nebraska, or one of its legacy cooperatives as they've consolidated, had been formed by farmers. And so when you stop and think about 100 years ago, or a little over 100 years ago, why did farmers feel the need to join together and organize businesses that would provide them crop inputs, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, those kinds of things, and form businesses that would also supply them on the farm with fuel and with feed and with all those inputs? And then also, why would they join together to market their commodities that they were raising? What was going on in the United States at that time? And really, if you stop and think about what was going on, we were going through a big societal change. And we were changing from a very agrarian economy into more of an industrial economy. And so, farming was becoming more industrialized as well. And the railroads came through the middle of the United States in the late 1800s, brought a lot of commerce with them, a lot of access to goods and services. In the early 1900s, then you saw automobiles and trucks. And so our transportation logistics changed a lot. And so suddenly farmers were able to say, well, we need to be able to compete in the marketplace. No longer, Nolan, were they raising their crops or their livestock just for their own consumption. They were raising for their own consumption, certainly, but also looking for a marketplace in which to sell into that marketplace and have a more productive, better economic outlook from their farming operations. And so when you look at that, basically what they said is we need, number one, on the commodity side, as we sell our commodities, I don't have market power on my own. For whatever I pull off my quarter section or 80 acres that
it's just not enough.
It was not enough that they had any market power to demand a price. But if they could pool, if many farmers could get together and pool those commodities they were raising, well, then they had the power to go to market and say, we have a big quantity here, and if you want that big quantity and you want to ship it on a rail, you want to truck it somewhere to a feedlot or other user, we now can supply this, but you're going to pay a price because we've got the ability to do that. And so Congress in 1920 passed what's called the Capper-Volstead Act.
Okay.
And the Capper-Volstead Act said all these farmer-owned cooperatives, farmers joining together to sell at a common price, technically violates the Sherman Antitrust Act. And so they're really violating the antitrust laws that were passed in the late 1800s. So they needed a mechanism to protect them in this cooperative business as they joined together. And so the Capper-Volstead Act was passed by Congress in 1920 and said, we're going to give farmers a limited antitrust exemption that for the processing, handling, and marketing of their commodities, they may join together, they may form companies, cooperatives to join together and undertake that enterprise. And that really spurred the movement of these. And so farmers needed goods and services, and they needed to be able to buy those in bulk and go to the marketplace and compete for the best price on those. They needed a place to sell their commodities in bulk and get the best price for that and compete on a national level at that point. Today we compete internationally, but back then it was national. And then finally, they needed services that they had not had before. And when you start to think about the industrialization and the farm logistics and going from the horses to the initial tractors, initial powered implements, and all those kinds of things, it was through the cooperatives that they were able to buy some of that equipment and equipment that would, elevators that would elevate corn cobs and corn up into those elevators where you used to see corn stored in. All those kinds of things, they started to look at, can we do this together? Can we come together and save money? That's what co-op profits are, savings. Can we save money by doing that and generate more income for ourselves and actually leverage what we're doing on the farm?
So, and because that's from 100 years ago to today, we're still doing the same thing, but there's just a lot more technology involved, and everything's bigger. And
till today, Nolan, what we got going on today is we're going through a big change in our society again. We've got societal change going on in a very rapid way. The digital revolution, the autonomous equipment that's coming, technology. We are now going from an industrial age into a digital age or a technological age, whatever you want to call it. And so we had our society changing a lot again, and our demographics are changing a lot, and how we farm is changing a lot. And so in their heyday, if you go from the beginning of the 1900s till about 1985 or so,
okay.
There grew to be about 289 cooperatives in the state of Nebraska.
Oh, okay.
Almost every rural community had at least had one cooperative, if not two. They would have a grain cooperative and then an input and supply or marketing cooperative that they would buy their fertilizers, ag chemicals, fuel, feed, and those kinds of things from. So over the years now, and so also in the 1980s, you also saw probably the peak of our farm population, probably even a little bit before that. I grew up in rural Nebraska. I grew up on a farm in the 1960s and early 70s in Nebraska. We went to town every Saturday night, as did everybody else around the rural areas. Our small town had 1,300 people, but I bet there's 3,000 or 4,000 people in town
every Saturday night.
on a Saturday night. The main street was lined with businesses, and it was the farming community that kept these rural communities going. My parents would go buy their groceries. They would go buy whatever they needed for the coming week. We didn't go to town all the time back then. And we used to joke that was bath night, that you only take a bath once a week when you go to town. But that's how the demographics were. And so we start then after the 70s and in the 80s start seeing a consolidation of demographics. People are aging out. People are not returning to the farms as career choices. Kids are leaving and going on into other careers, professional careers, and teaching and doing other things in larger urban areas. And so we're starting to see a shift in our populations in our rural areas. The other thing that happened in the 1980s, really, and picked up steam in the 90s and 20 years ago even, was the railroad logistics. And the railroads came to the cooperatives and other grain suppliers, and they said, if you can fill a 100-car shuttle loader for us, we'll give you discounts on that. And that means you can have more money per bushel of grain to pay back to your farmer members, your farmer owners of the co-op. And the co-ops said, wow, that's a pretty good deal. We can do that, but we've got to build infrastructure. We've got to put in rail loops. We've got to put in grain storage. Well. We've got to build terminals to handle this. And so over the last 25 years in Nebraska, you've seen significant development of rail shipping terminals by co-ops and non-co-ops. And those logistics, that's been expensive. I think the last shuttle loader that was put in Nebraska was a $30 million plus project. And so companies needed to have a balance sheet and working capital and members' equity in order to go borrow the other money they needed
to pay for the new shuttle loader.
To pay for the new shuttle loader and bring that benefit back to Nebraska. And just as an aside, I'm going to tell you, one of the recent shuttle loaders in Nebraska was put in an area where there was not train access before that. So there was a couple destination, there was a couple feedlots, maybe one ethanol plant, but it was a truck market, completely a truck market in this area. Putting the shuttle loader in has increased the basis in that area by 10 to 15 cents.
Wow.
And it was a farmer-owned cooperative that did that and created that value for their members. So that's an aside. I want to get back to really kind of this story that when you stop and think about it really makes sense. And so again, we're seeing a big shift going on. And so once the numbers of farmers go down and once technology changes and we're starting to see these rail markets and farmers are starting to ship by semi off their farms, we used gravity flow wagons for, I pulled 2 gravity flow wagons into the farmstead.
I mean, there's still people that definitely do. I mean, we see them all the time coming through.
I think my mom, we had a short truck, and I think my mom would take 300 bushel at a time to town and sit in line for 12 hours,
To dump one truck.
Right. And so, today, of course, it's a whole different story. And as we see harvests going on right now, you see what's going on. Farm commodity operations and farm supply operations, because of the technology and because of the fewer farmers and how much they're farming and how quickly they need to do it, speed and space. You hear that a lot in agricultural talk.
Alan says it all the time.
They need speed and space. What do farmers want? They need speed. When they need that product out on the farm, when they need the seed, the fertilizer, the chemicals, they got a window of opportunity and they've got to roll, and they got to roll now. So the farm supply industry has got to be able to have the rolling stock and the terminals and the storage and the inventory and all that stuff to do that. Likewise, when it's harvest time, as we're in right now, and a lot of farmers have storage on the farm, but a lot of farmers hold a lot of grain on the farm as well. And a lot of that comes to town. And when it comes to town, they want to dump quickly. They don't want to sit in a line.
Yeah.
And so a lot of intensive capital needed to be spent to do this. And so the railroads and the demographic changes in the size of farms and the speed and space, that all created pressure on cooperatives to merge and become larger, to get those balance sheets bigger so that they had the members' equity they needed and the working capital they needed in order to reinvest and provide these goods and services to their farm members. And so Now we're through the first 2 decades of the 20th century, and all of a sudden we're down to fewer than 30 agricultural cooperatives in the state of Nebraska today.
Oh, wow.
But I'm going to tell you, we have 404 cooperative locations in the state of Nebraska today, which is 40 more than 4 years ago. So stop and think about something. Cooperatives are owned by their members. Members vote on what goes on at the cooperative and elect the board of directors. The board of directors, in turn, sets the strategic direction for the cooperative and also has a say in determining where new assets are deployed. Where can we best serve our farmer members? And so you have farmers sitting in a boardroom working with management saying, where can we best do this? And that's why we're seeing an increase in locations, is because they're looking at their trade territories and they're saying, for speed and space, where best do we locate this?
I know we have some spaces in some tiny towns that on the outside looking in wouldn't make any sense, but then when you look at the amount of grain that goes through there, it makes total sense. Like the people in that area love it.
Right.
But from the outside looking in, you'd think that's crazy to spend millions of dollars building new bins.
But if they pay attention to how much traffic's coming in to fill and refill that facility, because you don't fill them just once, you fill them 3 or 4 times
for sure.
during the course of the year, and you empty them out that much too. So the traffic in and out is significant for those communities. The farmer-owned cooperatives are one of the major property tax payers in the state of Nebraska in each of the rural communities in which they live because of these locations. And as of last year, in 2019, employed 5,300 employees across the state of Nebraska directly. That's just directly. That doesn't account for indirect jobs. And so, while we've consolidated a lot, there's still a lot of economic activity going on. And so we did a study in the last couple of years called the Legacy Initiative. And we went out and talked to farmers about their attitudes about farmer-owned cooperatives. We wanted to see what it is they understood and didn't understand about their cooperatives.
Yeah.
We asked about patronage. Cooperatives pay patronage back if they make a profit, a savings. They pay that back to their members based upon the amount of business done. Part of that may be in cash, and part of that may be in deferred members' equity that the company keeps and uses as working capital, but redeems to the farmer someday in a redemption, in a cash redemption. And so we asked about patronage. We asked about what they thought about members' equity. And we asked older farmers and we asked a group of young farmers some of these same questions. And it was very interesting, some of the answers we got. There is a misconception out there, Nolan, that co-ops may charge more money for inputs or pay less for grain because they pay patronage. There could be nothing further from the truth. The process is the board of directors looks at their financials at the end of the year and says, did we make money? If so, how much did we make? And of that, how much can we afford to pay back to our members? The money a co-op makes belongs to the members. So that farmer board of directors sits there and they say, well, there's basically 3 things we're going to do with our money. We have to redeem members' equity out to those who are eligible to get these cash payments out of the money we've been holding for a while. Every co-op has a program, whether it's a revolving program or an age-based program or something. I think your cooperative may have a combination.
Yeah, I think recently we've changed it to a combination of both.
So that's one thing they look at is we want to redeem that equity and get that money back into our members' hands. We also want to pay patronage. If we've been successful this year, we want to share those profits with the people who created those profits, so we're going to pay a cash patronage back. But the third thing that a lot of people don't think about is the reinvestment of property, plant, and equipment to serve the farmer's needs, creating that speed and the space, the infrastructure to serve the farmer's needs. In 2019, now I'm talking statewide, this isn't just your cooperative, but I'm talking statewide, the farmer-owned cooperatives paid cash patronage and cash equity redemptions of $50.7 million.
Holy cow.
In addition to that, they reinvested $157 million in property, plant, and equipment, new fertilizer terminals, new dry storage terminals for fertilizer, new rail facilities, new shipping facilities, new rolling stock, sprayers, tenders, all kinds of things, and a lot of digital technology and other things to help farmers. And so all of those economic benefits, I spoke about the cash parts of that, the $157 million of reinvestment, almost all in rural areas. None of that takes place in urban areas. Almost all of it's in rural areas. And so think of that economic activity that company creates in those rural communities. I said 5,300 employers. Usually the largest co-ops are the largest employers in many of the communities that they serve. And I think that's true with your employee group as well.
I would have to. I can't obviously say for sure, but most of the little towns that I've gone to, I could easily see that happening.
It's either the school, the hospital, or the co-op.
Yeah.
It's going to be one of those. One of those entities, and also keeping these employee groups together. I think your company has
about 600
employees. But of those 600 employees, do you realize how many of them serve on their volunteer fire departments?
We actually just went, because we just gave out a bunch of money to various rural fire departments for equipment. Right. And in doing so, we found way more people on our staff that were volunteer firefighters than we ever expected.
Volunteer firefighters, coaching their youth sports, putting back and volunteering back in their communities. Last year, the farmer-owned cooperatives across the state of Nebraska put $1.8 million in charitable contributions back into their rural communities. These are school and youth organizations, FFA, FHA, local scholarships, fire departments, volunteer fire departments. The grain bin safety issues do a lot of financing of those types of activities, and $1.8 million. I mean, you can tell these are locally owned companies and owned by these farmers because they're putting their money back into their communities, and that's just a really critical part. In addition to the local scholarships, I think your co-op gives some local scholarships.
Yep.
The Nebraska Cooperative Council handed out $31,000 of scholarships last year to 8 students to attend the University of Nebraska, 1 at the University of Kearney, and 2 at the College of Technical Agriculture in Curtis. And so very active in youth organizations and promoting our rural youth and those kinds of things. But where this all gets me to is so we've got this dynamic company still going, but they've gotten bigger, and they've gotten young farmers would describe them as more corporate. And not like Grandpa's Co-op, where Grandpa went in and had coffee, every Tuesday morning every morning from 10 o'clock to 10:30 and found out about how much rain everybody got.
Say, you'd be very maybe you wouldn't be surprised the amount of people that we still have in our smaller local branches that come in for coffee every morning.
Right, but still, this was what some young farmers said. Well, it's become corporate. It's separate. Members' equity doesn't mean that much to me. It's something I'm going to get in the future.
I believe one thing I've heard is that we're becoming what we were designed
to not be.
To not be. Yeah.
Right. We're just like everybody else out there. That's some of the perceptions going on, is that we are a supply business like everybody else out there. We are a grain business like everybody else out there. But again, I'm going to tell you there could be nothing farther from the truth. So let's talk about some of the things that make co-ops unique. Co-ops are farmer-owned and controlled. You cannot have a non-farmer sit on the board of directors of an agricultural cooperative and keep their Capper-Volstead protection. Only active agricultural producers can vote to elect that board of directors and vote on matters involving the cooperative. They're formed for the mutual benefit of the members. They have an obligation, legal and otherwise, to return value and benefits back to their members. We've talked about the $157 million of new assets last year and the almost $51 million of cash patronage and that sort of stuff. They're legally obligated to do that. And their competitors aren't doing that, Nolan. You don't see non-cooperative competitors handing cash back to the farmers that are using them. And now we had some farmers say, well, but with that patronage, we'd have it cheaper. No, you wouldn't. The grain price is the grain price. It's whatever the market will bear. Patronage has nothing to do with it. The fertilizer, farm chemicals, all those prices, it's what the market will bear. And are you getting services with that? Is somebody standing behind that product? Is that company also contributing back into your community? All of those things are very unique features of a farmer-owned cooperative. And the other thing is members' equity. Holding this equity and then paying it out either on a revolving basis in 15 years or paying it out at age 60 or 65, whatever the case may be. Younger guys say, well, that doesn't mean anything to me. It's going to be a long time before I get that. So what's the value to me? Here's the value. Members' equity allows that cooperative to hold the risk for them. They don't need to go out into the marketplace and purchase their fertilizer and nitrogen and all that sort of stuff in the summertime for fall delivery or for possible spring delivery at a price that they don't know what the value of that product is going to be by the time it's delivered to the farm or to put on the farm. They don't have to store it and maintain it. And so the fact that they together own facilities to store and maintain these inventories, they share the risk of price on that. And allows them to stay in that marketplace. That members' equity allows them to stay in that marketplace. And that's true with grain inventories as well. To hold a grain inventory, you've got to hedge that inventory. You either got to go on the Board of Trade and get a position to back up your physical inventory, or you have to have a physical contract to back up those purchases. Because co-ops are not allowed to speculate in the grain market. They have to have...
That's been made very clear to me.
They have to have everything hedged. Everything. Management doesn't last long if they don't hedge the inventories.
We do not make any suggestions or guesses or advice or any of that.
You have policies that say this is how much grain, there's always a little open grain at the end of the day, but it's not very much compared to your overall handling.
And we have Ryan Norris is... I don't know, certified or whatever the term is with the Chicago Board of Trade.
Right.
And I've tried to listen to him talk about that stuff, and it means nothing to me. So I put my full trust in, put my full trust in that man to know what's going on.
But to maintain to maintain the hedges, to maintain your risk protection on that, you have to be able to fund changes in the market. If your position changes, you may have to put more money into the market to hold that position. And having that members' equity allows your cooperative to have lines of credit in order to do that. And so sometimes when we get into very inverse grain markets and the markets go against us and we have big inventories, instead of having to sell those inventories at a loss, we're able to hold those inventories, capture carry in the market, but only because we have members' equity to hold that and to back that up and to go forward and do that. And the same thing true in the members' equity. When you're building assets today, your cooperative as well as all the other members of the Nebraska Cooperative Council, when you're building assets, you're using members' equity to, again, leverage, to be able to borrow the money if necessary, or sometimes you can just build them. That's fine too. But you're using members' equity to do that, to provide that those goods and services back to the members. And as you're doing that, you're not building for 2 years from now or 6 months or 3 years or 5 years. You guys are putting in assets that are going to be here for generations, 30, 40, 50 years. The co-ops are reinvesting into the future of agriculture and the future of their members' operations. And so to the young farmers, what I really want them to understand is, from a cash patronage, you're not getting that anywhere else, and it's not changing your pricing, and you're not getting that benefit anywhere else. Without members' equity and without this company in the marketplace, you would not have the competition to keep everybody else honest in the marketplace. They should all stop and think about something. If farmers cooperatives in Nebraska are very strong, healthy, good businesses, and they have big trade territories, and so you take them out of the marketplace and replace them with some independent hedge fund owned or internationally owned company who has a return on investment philosophy and we're only going to provide a good or service if we get a return on investment on it. And sooner or later, you're going to lose goods or services because not everything you do is profitable. And you are not going to have anybody in the marketplace keeping it honest. Farmer-owned entities keep the marketplace honest. And with regard to it's hard to say, it's hard to think, Nolan, about the negative in terms of, well, what if this wasn't here? Because we don't really know. But we can tell that if you take that out of the marketplace and you know who the competitors are that would come in and fill those gaps.
I mean, we know who's definitely trying already. So
would you be better off with the cooperative in the marketplace or not? And another analogy I always use, and because we have to keep reminding our members, keep reminding our farmers that they do own it. When they drive by these facilities, they own them. And they're directing how they're used. They're directing how they're deployed. They're directing how this money is used. And when you drive by other facilities, they're not owned. That's all return on investment. Farm cooperatives are not based on return on investment. It's return on the business done. It's return on doing business together. It's return on making sure that we have our place in the marketplace. And so that is so important today. We have fewer and fewer farmers, as we all know, and that demographic is going to continue. They're farming more and more land. I think near Milford, which is in your trade territory last year, I think there was an autonomous tractor demonstration that took place, and lots of people were out there watching that tractor go up and down the field with nobody in it. That's coming. That technology is coming.
I'm so honestly surprised it's not already here. Considering what exists already.
Right. We're on the verge of a real change in agriculture. There's been a major study done across the United States of the farmer of the future by Aimpoint Research based in Columbus, Ohio. And they've basically determined that in the next 2 decades, we will have fewer than 100,000 farmers across the United States.
Oh, wow.
Likely closer to 65,000. Now, today, we have 64,000 co-op members, agricultural cooperative members in Nebraska alone. So stop and think about that drastic demographic change that's going to take place there, and how much larger these farms are going to be. And you're going to have the technology, the autonomous technology, because those implements are going to have to run 24/7. And labor is such a difficult thing to get in rural Nebraska, as in all the rural areas. In agriculture in general, labor is so difficult to come by and find enough employees to do this. And so we're going to see our cooperatives start filling some of these gaps with technology and with maybe equipment sharing and technology support, becoming the liaison between food companies and farmers, because that's the other thing that's going to happen. We might think we're very regulated today in terms of the government regulations and how we plant and how we spray and all those kinds of things. And, we're constantly running up against courts ruling that this chemical or that chemical is banned. And it makes farming difficult. But it's nothing compared to what's going to happen and what's already started to happen. And that is the consumers, and there's a lot more consumers than there are farmers, are driving the food chain. And the consumers are looking at food companies. First of all, they're retailers, the Costco's and the Walmarts and the Kroger's and the Hy-Vee's and all those places. And they're saying, okay, when consumers saying, we want healthy, fresh food that we know what's in it. And so Walmart and all these Kroger, Costco, all these big retailers are looking at food companies and saying, we have to be able to prove how this was raised. So from the kernel of seed going into the ground, how much water was put on it, how much chemical, what kind of chemical, fertilizer, what kind of fertilizer, and how much, whether it's a GMO traded type seed and production activity, or whether there's organics involved, or whether it's done in a sustainable, regenerative agricultural way. Consumers care about how much water is being used, how much fertilizer is being used, all those kinds of things. And that is really what's going to happen. And farmers really don't want to hear this, but all predictions are that food companies are going to eventually be looking at farmers saying, we'll pay you to plant this type of crop, but we're supplying everything. You're delivering everything to us. It's going to be a segregated shipment so we can keep tabs on it. And this thing called blockchain we keep hearing about is going to be how we trace that seed and that genetic trait in that seed from being planted in the ground, if it goes into animal feed and through animals into protein, or whether it goes into another form of food source. We're going to trace that from its inception to the table. And we're going to be transparent, and we've got to show the consumer what we're doing.
Exactly what happened.
And so farmers are going to need the technology. They're going to need to be able to have that, prove their sustainability practices, prove their regenerative practices, prove what they've done and that it's been segregated and all those kinds of things. And one of the best places they can do that with is the farmer-owned cooperative, where it's going to provide them with the services they don't have today that they're going to need tomorrow, just like 100 years ago. And it's going to provide them with the marketplace that they need tomorrow, which they don't have today, but which they needed 100 years ago. And it's going to provide them with access to what they need as far as inputs and all that sort of stuff to do it in this way, which they did not, which is also what they needed 100 years ago.
Let alone just the records of everything that they did. I mean, granted, they might do some stuff that's not through us, but
right,
we have a record of absolutely everything we've done.
That's right. And so the co-ops are in a good position with their farmer members to help them through this process. And so those predictions are out there for change, but notice the common theme. Cooperatives are formed for the mutual benefit of the members. Agricultural cooperatives are formed in order for the farmers to increase the value of their production. And so when you stand in your farm today and say, here's what the value of my production is today, you're also thinking, how can I create more value in this? Is it my crop choice? Is it how I'm doing it? Is it, all these kinds of things? And as these food companies really ramp this up, what this new world looks like, they're going to see opportunity in making these relationships and having these relationships. And so, the cooperatives, it's nice to do this during Co-op Month, and the governor recognizing that it's Co-op Month, is recognition really by our policymakers that the cooperatives in Nebraska have provided just a really important economic linchpin in terms of the economic health of Nebraska, and that we're positioned to continue to do so. And so for all the young farmers out there, I want to say we're not corporate, we're you, and we're whatever you need us to be. And you need to communicate with us and tell us what you need us to be, because you own us.
I was going to say a common thing that I hear is, like they want to change the opinion of the customer. And I mean, personally, I'm more of the, if I'm a product that I'm trying to sell, it's not, I don't need to change the customer. I need to change what I'm doing to meet the needs of the customer. So do you have any thoughts on like what we need to do differently or what co-ops need to do differently? Because I'm sure there's a happy medium where it's education about what we are, and
so there is an economic fact here that farmers, like everybody else, will look at price, and they'll make their decisions based upon price, and they'll compare prices, and they should, and they absolutely should, and cooperatives need to be in the marketplace and compete in that marketplace and do that, and they absolutely should do that as well. But what I'm going to say to the farmers is, when it's a company you own, you have to look at value. And you have to look at value that always isn't just in economics or in price, but it's in goods, services, return, positioning in the marketplace, what kind of education and information can I bring you? And cooperatives are really ramping up, as you know, in your own cooperative, are really ramping up on education in terms of sustainability, regenerative farming practices, because we know we're going to have to start proving all this stuff up. And so as necessary as the cooperative was for the farmer to compete nationally 100 years ago, these farmer-owned entities are just as important to compete internationally for the individual farmers today. And it is such an opportunity for a young farmer to get more active with their cooperative and run for the board of directors and get interested in serving on committees and doing those things and understanding how the cooperative works. Many board members will say to me, Nolan, that, boy, I didn't realize just what was all involved in this until I sat on the board. And actually, until I sat on the board for a couple of years, it took me a little bit to figure some of this out. And our patrons and our voting members don't have that same level of information and understanding. And we need to do a better job of talking to them. And one of the things the young farmers said to us, and I think our cooperatives are doing a better job of this. Our young farmers said at the end of these, we had a phone type open forum type thing, and so the interviewer would ask a question and they would all talk. And almost to a person, there was two different sections of this, and I think everybody that participated in each session at the end of the session said, "Thank you for asking us what we think. Nobody ever asks us what we think." And I think we need to ask them what they think. Yeah. And we need to take the opportunity to educate and say, here's where we can position you in the future, and here's why a farmer-owned opportunity is your best value. And one of the analogies I've used at a lot of young farmer retreats, yeah. I sometimes speak at young farmer retreats, and one of the analogies I've used is if your family owned the Chevy dealership in your town, and you could go to the next town, and that Chevy dealer that competes with your family offered you a truck for $100 less, would you buy that truck for $100 less rather than going to your family-owned where you get the benefit because you're part of the ownership of that group? And people stop and, well, they're going to go where the best price is, but they're not going to go compete with themselves usually, right?
I mean, you would hope so.
Well, my guess is that it's going to be a very silent Thanksgiving meal if somebody goes and buys a truck and the family owns the dealership if somebody pulls in with a truck from the neighboring dealership. So that's what we need to think about is for generations, these companies have been built. And even though they've grown, they're still local in nature. And they're still in every rural community in those trade territories. Not every. I mean, things have changed a little bit, but many of our rural communities still host cooperative locations. And it's still part of the workplace and the social fabric and everything else that goes on in these communities. And it's just really important. And if farmers want to maintain the quality of life and do those kinds of things, I think that it's really important they look at the value that these entities bring them, that they already own. And since it's not a return on investment, Nolan, they didn't write a check to invest in this and seek a return on investment. They're members because they've done business and they've earned that membership, and their equity is that also they've earned by doing business. And so their return is their return on their business. And that really is such a unique type of business model when you stop and think about it in the United States. So it's a good thing that nationally and in the state, we stopped to recognize October as Cooperative Month because it's an important piece of our rural economic economy. In 2016, the Co-op Council did an economic impact study. And so we're a few years past that now. But what it showed was across the state, farmer-owned cooperatives had a $2.2 billion economic impact in the state of Nebraska. And one of the interesting pieces of that was at that time, $127 million of that was in the Lincoln and Omaha metropolitan areas. Because while we have direct employees and direct locations, there's a lot of businesses that serve cooperatives that are based in the metropolitan areas and a lot of employees. I think at that time, while there was a fairly stable number of employees working directly for cooperatives. I think about 14,000 jobs in urban Nebraska, in these urban areas, were attributable to
a co-op existing.
To a co-op existing. And 127 million in Lincoln and Omaha, 100 million of that was in the Douglas-Sarpy County area. Well, we were in the congressman that represents that district, not the current congressman, but Congressman Ashford, when he represented the district. We were in his office and waiting for him to come to a meeting, and his aide was talking to us. And she said, well, he's going to be a little late. He's at a meeting about the new runway at Offutt, because Offutt is so important to the district because it brings in about $100 million of economic activity to the Omaha metropolitan area every year. And I said, well, that's interesting because the farmer-owned cooperatives bring in $100 million to the Omaha metropolitan district every year. And so it's important that we know those things. It's important our policymakers know and understand our cooperative system and how it works and how it's owned and how the farmers are impacted by any policy that might be made that's pro-cooperative, anti-cooperative, tax policy, farm policy, all those kinds of things. So it really has been, I got very lucky. I was one of the kids that left the farm and decided not to farm.
Decided to go do something else.
And decided to go do something else. And my dad, actually his health, he had some serious health issues when I was finishing college. And I had already been admitted to law school, but I had said to him, I went home and I had thought about it. And I said, well, Dad, if you want me to come home and farm, I will do that. And he said, have you lost your mind? This is not what you wanted to do. But here's what I got lucky, Nolan, with, and that is I got to spend my career working with farmers, working with farmer-owned companies, and dealing with this cooperative industry because it truly has been a challenging and interesting and dynamic group of people to work with. And, agriculture always changes. It's always cycling. It has been very, very fulfilling from that standpoint. So it's always a pleasure to talk about cooperatives. I'm glad you asked me to.
Well, of course. When you came to that annual meeting, and I remember I was very new to the company, but we were also new to the podcast. And I was like, I need to talk to this guy. Because you were saying a lot of the things that I had been saying. And I think there's a lot of stuff that remains unsaid or people just don't think about. And a lot of times I hear things along the lines of, we've been here for 100 years. We don't need to change. Or, it's been fine. So why change it? Mm-hmm. And I think there's that disconnect between trying to evolve into keeping things going by keeping it fresh and kids are different than they were.
Yep.
And I think getting all of that out there is very important to everybody's success.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been here 100 years. Why do we need to change? Well, if you stop and think, things have changed an awful lot in that 100 years.
Bit.
And, it's incremental. So you sometimes don't always notice the change. But at times in our society, and during the period of time when co-ops were being formed, that change was rapid. Stop and think about the development of automobiles and trucks and how we transported commodities and transported cattle and the railroads and all that sort of stuff was very different from the early 1800s where people really farmed just to survive and have their families survive. Community. Right. And they might have traded with each other on some things, but they really farmed to feed themselves. And have cattle, but again, to feed themselves and that sort of thing. The whole idea of farming becoming, an enterprise where you are now selling commodity and doing that kind of stuff, that came of age in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And so it was technology that allowed that. And so as we're on the brink of another technological kind of revolution here, it remains to be seen how many of these predictions will come true and those kinds of things. But we can already see some of this stuff start to happen. And I think that if young farmers want to have partners they can rely on, they've got that partner because they already own it. And that's the farmer-owned cooperative.
Well, thanks, Rocky. That is all the time we have. I appreciate you coming in, and I appreciate everybody listening. As always, we release new episodes every 2 weeks on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And leave us a review, leave us a comment, like, share. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want to hear about next. And as always, keep growing.